What exactly is contained in Shiras Haazinu? The words of Pashas Haazinu up until the point which we refer to as a Shira, according to the Ramban, everything. What do we mean everything? We mean precisely that, everything. According to Sifri, the Ramban says, quote, Yedai l'shira zu, sheyesh ba achshav, v'yesh ba l'sha'avar, v'yesh ba li'osid lavai. Whatever is taking place right now in the present is somewhere in Pashas Haazinu. In other words, if we had the right program, we can decipher it, and we can see in the words of Haazinu an explanation as to exactly what is taking place right now on this world. The Yeshba l'sha'avar, it includes whatever passed, the Yeshba li'osid lavai, whatever is yet to come. In other words, from the perspective of any human being in the Seder HaDoros, in the course of the generations, regardless of where he is and what he has to face with, Moshe Rabbeinu included your scenario in Pashas Haazinu, in terms of the way you are dealing with the present, how you reflect on your past, and what is yet to come, for us as individuals, and for Klal Yisrael as a whole, and for the world at large. The Ramban continues, V'yeshba bi'olam hazeh, v'yeshba li'olam haba. And therefore, in conclusion of the Shira, the Pasuk says, continues the Ramban, Vayavi Moshe, Vayedaber, and he spoke as Kal divrei hashira hazais bi'aznei ha'am, as Kal divrei hashira hazais, this entire song stress on the word Kal, lahagid, to teach us that indeed it includes everything. Kaileles Kal hu asidus lamai. Despite the fact that it is relatively a small parsha, continues the Ramban. And suppose you had a time-proven stargazer who continues to give you letters and issues forecasts about what's going to happen the next day, and everyone knows that he's always right. Whatever he told us yesterday came true today. He is a time-proven vehicle of predicting the future. He obviously sees, as the emanations are coming down from Shemayim to manifest themselves down here in this world, he sees it a day before. It's not debatable. I believe what the stargazer says, continues the Ramban in the Moshel, the nation of Sky, he told us last week how the Dow Jones is going to finish this week, and he was accurate to the point. He told us exactly what's going to be in this week's papers, from the beginning to the end. And he's never wrong. So when he tells us something, we tend to believe him. I mean, after all, obviously he has some handle on being privy to information as it's sent down to this world. Dr. Ramban, well, if you can see yourself believing in something like that, if indeed you found someone like that, and view Parshas Haazinu, which in a sense is Moshe Rabbeinu's closing words to Klal Yisrael, coming from the greatest Navi who ever existed and will ever exist. That is, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu. Reb Tzadok HaKohen elaborates on the words of the Ramban. The 600,000 basic neshamas who are makabel the Torah are rooted to the 600,000 letters of the Torah. We each have a shaykhus to a certain letter. And that is why this week's parsha, B'dafka, you have the mitzvah of the writing of a Sefer Torah. Because Parshas Haazinu reflects the kloliyos, the set of all of the nefashos of Klal Yisrael, of all of the neshamas of Klal Yisrael, and their saga, and their story, and their challenges, and their nisyonos throughout the generations. And included in Parshas Haazinu is the entire Torah Shebiksav. That is why, once again, it is the last parsha we read on Shabbos. It concludes, at least in a certain sense, the 53 Parshiyos of Torah, Gematria Gan, as in Gan Eden. Now, Rav Tzadok explains that in a certain sense, Parshas V'zayis HaBracha is already the beginning of the Ha'aris of Torah Shebal Peh, as opposed to Haazinu, which concludes Torah Shebiksav. Now, of course, it has to be put into perspective. Obviously, if the Sefer Torah is missing even one letter of the V'zayis HaBracha, the Sefer Torah is possible. But we see even from the Gemara, in regard to the last 8 psukim of V'zayis HaBracha, that they have different halachas, because there's an issue of who wrote the words from the Yamas Moshe, Eved Hashem and On. One man Damar holds Yeshua wrote it, the other man the Yama holds it was Nichtav B'dema. And as a result, you're not supposed to stop during those psukim. And of course, in the basic structure of Kriyas HaTorah, you see that V'zayis HaBracha has somewhat of a different nature, being that it doesn't have a Shabbos for itself. So while, again, of course, V'zayis HaBracha is part of the Torah, but it's part of the Torah that already introduces us to Torah Shebal Peh, as opposed to Pashas Haazinu, as the Psalm explains it, which is more of the Siyum and Torah Shebiksav. Now, the Kedusha of Shabbos, as we have discussed many times, comes on its own. Bezdin is not Mekadosh Shabbos. It's a fact of creation. Or better, as the Orach Chaim HaKadosh explains it, it is the basis for the continuous creation of the world. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that the Rebbeinu Shalom, in the formula of Ma'aseh Bereishis, only gave the world a koyach to last for 6 days. Shabbos gives it a koyach to go for another 6 days. So Shabbos comes from Shemayim. That's Torah Shebiksav that comes from Shemayim. The Kedusha of Yom Tov, on the other hand, comes from Klal Yisrael. Bezdin determines which day Rosh Chodesh is, and as a result, the Rebbeinu Shalom sends down the Kedusha of Yom Tov based on that determination. So, in other words, Klal Yisrael creates the Kedusha of Yom Tov, and that's why, explains the Tzaddik, the Zois HaBracha, which is really the introduction to Torah Shebal Peh, is read b'dafka on Yom Tov, because it's the Kedusha that comes from Klal Yisrael, through Klal Yisrael. And with this we can perhaps understand why the Steipler, the Chaim Levracha, writes in the Sefer Kraina the Igros, in one of the letters that appears over there, that merely reciting Parshas Haazinu is a skula for Emunah, to bring Emunah, to bring faith into the heart of a Yid. Because every Yid, in essence, has Emunah. We have our shoyrish in the Torah. Except sometimes we engage in certain chatoim that block it out. Tzaddikim used to say, if the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't want someone to do tshuva, then he takes away from him the opportunity to learn. I heard this from Rabbi Yaina first, L'chaim Levracha. Because once a Yid learns, somehow he directly or indirectly gets connected to his letter in the Sefer Torah, to his shoyrish Hanasham, and that fuels his emunah. If a person realizes that suddenly I don't have an opportunity to learn anymore, I used to have time, but it just doesn't work out, stop and think. Are they trying to prevent you from doing tshuva? And of course the proper response to that is, Rebbeinu Shalom, help me come back in, not chas v'shalom to despair. So Parshas Haazinu, which we know, as the Ramban tells us, directly has some button, some code over there in the program, which spells out the life story of every single Yid, is a skula for Emunah, because it drives us back to our source. It fuels our neshama. We've mentioned many times the story that the Kav HaYashar brings and the Yisod Yosef brings, that the Ramban had a Talmud with the name of Avner. This Talmud, unfortunately, went off the derech, and he became a big general. And he became, like many Yidden that go off the derech, a general that likes to prove that he no longer has any connections with his former co-religionists. So he had the Ramban summoned on Yom Kippur. And he made the Ramban witness him devour, I don't remember exactly, but something to the effect of a duck roasted with milk. And he told him that the duck was not shachted. And he asked the Ramban, being that it's Yom Kippur and I was over all of these Isurim, tell me exactly how many Averos were I over. And the Ramban made a cheshbon, whether it was 5 or 6. And Avner argued that it was 6, not 5. And the Ramban and Avner began a halachic dispute. They began to be mefalpel in halacha, whether he was over 5 lavim or 6 lavim. And these are very complicated sugyas. Ein Isser Chalalisser, Isser Meiser, Isser Koil, the person does one act which contains multiple lavim. Does he technically violate 1 or 2? And especially when he does an act that contains many averos. At the end of the discussion, the Ramban conceded to Avner that Avner was right. He was over 6 lavim and not 5. That Avner had better calculated the sugya than the Ramban did. And the Ramban asked Avner, your koyach in Torah is so great. Even now, even after all you have sunk, you still maintain such a tremendous knowledge in Torah. Why? Why did you go off the derech? So Avner said it was one thing that you said. You wrote, you told us that Parshas Haazinu contains the life story of every single Yid. Impossible. It's the smallest sedra. From the smallest sedra, how could it possibly contain the life story of every single Yid, of every single action that took place in this world, past, present, and future? And the Ramban said, this is the Messiah that I have for my Rebbeim, and therefore, as far as I am concerned, whether we understand it or not, it is a fact. Of course, if you would have told Avner that one day I could hold a computer disk in my hand, about 2 millimeters thick, and about as big as a bagel, and that it contains in it the social security numbers of the entire country and all of their incomes, he would have also thought I was mad. But apparently there were things that Avner was yet to learn. And one of them was what the Ramban says. So whether you understand it or not, this is a fact of life. Pashas Haazinu have the life story of every single Yid, past, present, and future. So Avner got angry at the Ramban. He said, so show me where my life story is. And the Ramban went off to a corner and he was mispalo. And he came back to Avner and he pointed out to a pasuk right before Chamishi, Kapitel Lamed Beis, pasuk Chaf Vav. The pasuk says, Amarti Afayim, I will relegate them. Ashbisa me'enesh zichram, I will destroy them from any remembrance of mankind. No one's going to even know who they are. Avner, this pasuk refers to you. Eventually your enemies that you think are your friends now are going to recall on a fact that you cannot change. Once a Jew, always a Jew. And they're going to rid you of your honor and glory. They are going to dump your body someplace. No one is even going to know what happened to you. You're going to be completely forgotten from anyone's memory. You're going to be lost. Like Tzaddikim says, if Yidden don't make proper Kiddush, then Goyim remember to make the proper Havdalah. So Avner laughed. He says, so who is to say that that pasuk refers to me? So the Ramban told him that the third letter in the word Afayim is an Aleph. Afayim is spelled Aleph Fei, Aleph Yud Hey Mem. The third letter in the word Ashbisa is a Beis. Ashbisa is spelled Aleph Shin Beis, Yud Sav Hey. The third letter in the word Me'enesh is a Nun, and the third letter in the word Zichram is a Reish. That is your name, Avner, and your destiny. Avner was overtaken by what the Ramban said. And he began to cry that he wanted to do tshuva. Eventually, he walked off his position, got into a little boat, and sailed off into the ocean. And no one ever knew what happened to him. Although, the way the Kav Yashar explains it, the Ramban said that he would spend much time being mispawel for Avner's neshama, so that indeed his tshuva should be completely accepted and that his neshama should come to its tikkun. So you see an interesting thing. Ultimately, the pasuk's description of Avner would come to fruition. He would disappear. He would be forgotten. No one knew what happened to him. But he was zeicher that it should happen through tshuva. Had he not listened to the Ramban, eventually it would have happened to him anyhow. It's just that his so-called friends would have made him disappear. And this can give us perhaps a little bit of an insight into the difficult question of Yediyah and Bechira, Kadosh Baruch Hu, knowing what is going to happen in a person's own free choice. Ultimately, the nevuah of the pasuk would be what the nevuah of the pasuk was. But the range of Bechira would be the difference between Gan Eden and the lack of such for Avner. Now, it's quite fascinating to note that the Ramban, in his Pirush on Chumash, on this pasuk of Amarti Afayim, understands the word Afayim as a lashon of Peah, which means the corner. The corners of our head is where our payas grow from. There is a mitzvah to leave Peah, that is the corner of the field, for the poor people to be able to collect. The Ramban says in his second chant that this pasuk, I will relegate them to some far corner of the world where no one will remember or know where they are, refers to the Aseret HaShvatim, who were exiled to the river Goizen, which the Chachamim refer to as Sambatyan. And the Ramban goes on to explain that it's called Sambatyan because this is a river that throws rocks all week long, except for Shabbos. It rests on Shabbos, but of course Shabbos we can't cross it because we're not allowed to travel on a ship on Shabbos. It's called Sambatyan. The Ramban explains that the word Sabbath comes from Shabbos, Sabbath. And the Ramban explains that in Arabic, Shabbos is called Sabbath. Even in Russian, Shabbos is called Sabbata. And the letters Yud, Vav, Nun are sometimes added to a word, like we find many places, and the Ramban lists them. So the river Sabbatyain really refers to Shabbos, the Shabbos river that doesn't throw any rocks on Shabbos, and that's where at least some elements of the Aseret HaShvatim are, someplace on this world. And although many have speculated where this place is, anywhere from Afghanistan to the Himalayan mountains, the fact is that we don't know where it is. Thus the pasuk says, Afayim, off to some corner, where it's Ashbisa Mi'enesh Zichram, where we don't know where the Aseret HaShvatim are, and we probably won't know until Mashiach comes, and Eliyahu Navi brings them back. Now, it is not the intention here to go into a discussion of the Aseret HaShvatim. That's a completely different issue, but the point is you see that the Ramban sees in this pasuk some type of concept of sailing off to some unknown hidden water. which appears to be somewhat consistent with the story we just quoted from the Kav Yashar in Yesod Yosef. We've already mentioned that Pashas Haazinu is referred to as a shira. Lehalacha, it is written like a shira. And it's like of Yashir, you can see in a Sefer Torah that it's written differently, except that of Yashir is written in 30 lines and the Pasha of Haazinu in 70 lines. Correct the B'Maisha, L'maisa, this is a Pasha that contains a lot of Teichacha and Sar for Klal Yisrael. How do we refer to it as a shira, as a song? And for the B'Maisha from the Yerushal Rebbe Zechon, that precisely shows how far in depth, how thorough this Pasha is in terms of what it always meant for us, what it is, and ultimately what it will mean for us. A time will come, when the Shiach will come. A time comes for every person. A time will come for Klal Yisrael, when we can look back at the story of our life, and we will begin to understand why we had to endure certain difficulties. And at that time, in retrospect, we will be given to understand why we had to face those challenges and difficulties in life, which during those trying times we thought, these periods are so dark. Why is the Kadosh Baruch Hu doing this to us? Why do I have to pass through such a dark tunnel in life? Ultimately, when we'll be given to understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu guided us, and how HaKadosh Baruch Hu healed us, now whatever was done for us down here was l'toivaseinu, for our good, at that point we will begin to sing a shira, not only for the good things, but even for the difficult things that we had to endure. To put it perhaps in simpler terms, even if a person went through a frightening period, but ultimately when you reach the island and you look back and you say, Baruch Hashem, I've gone through it, so you sing a song of praise, and everything is included in the shira, the difficult times and the promising times. Because once you're on solid ground, once you're safe and you're looking back, then it's easy to sing about what happened. I made it through. And that's the message of the shira. During the storm, it's very hard to sing, virtually impossible. But knowing that it's not a free-for-all, knowing that there is a guiding hand, knowing that our life follows a script, and knowing that a time will come that we will look back and be able to sing, because we will be shown by the Rebbeinu Shalom why we had to endure whatever we experienced and why it was for our own good, the mere knowledge that such a destination is on the horizon is already a consolement, is already a reason to sing. So yes, Pashas Haazinu is full of Teichacha, Pashas Haazinu is full of warnings, Pashas Haazinu represents the pitfalls of failing, and it's also all included under the umbrella of a shira, because it promises every year, one way or another, you will ride out the storm. Moshe Rabbeinu first compares the words of Torah to rain, and then to dew. Yarev kamotar lekchi, tizel katao imrasi. Rashi explains, Moshe Rabbeinu added dew to the rain because rain is something that is somewhat of a compromise. Most of the world is happy with rain. Everyone understands you need rain. But not everyone is particularly happy that it's raining on a given day. On the other hand, the moisture supplied by the dew is something that the world needs and never gets in anyone's way. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu uses both mishalim, Yarev Kamato Lekhi and Tizel Katalim Rasi. Here's the lashon of Rashi. Why dew? Everyone is happy with dew. When it comes to rain, some people are depressed on a rainy day. Kigan, for example, people that are traveling en route, they don't like when it rains. Or someone who has a pit full of wine, he's not happy when it rains into that wine. We know people that feel all their bones that start hurting when it rains. People complain, I know it's going to rain. But dew, no one ever says, oy, there's dew outside. So Moshe uses both. Yarev kamater likhi, but Torah is even more perfect than rain. It is tizel katal imrasi. But it doesn't really answer the question. So why did Moshe Rabbeinu just use the metaphor of dew and not mention rain at all? Why mention rain first and then sort of perfect it by adding it's also compared to dew? Dr. Ksav Sefer, because then we wouldn't get the message. And what is the message that Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching us? There is a fundamental difference between dew and rain, besides the fact that dew doesn't get in anyone's way. Rain starts out with the earth, the Eid Yalam in the earth. The water evaporates from the earth, it goes up into the clouds, and it comes down in the form of rain. Dew, on the other hand, comes straight from Shammai. In Limud HaTorah, there are two pchinas. There's Yagato Mitzasa Tam, and if you work hard enough, and then you say, Baruch Hashem, I figured it out, believe that person. And the Mishnah also goes on to say, Yagati V'loi Mitzasi, the person says, I exerted myself, I worked as hard as I could, and I still didn't break through, don't believe him. The Kotzka explains, don't believe him that he worked hard enough. So there is an aspect of Limud HaTorah that is attained only through massive application. That requires yigiyah, that requires lack of sleep, that requires total commitment. And then there's an inyan of lakume girsa. There's an inyan of siyata d'shmaya. Niftuchu loy shari shemayim. So many stories where tzaddikim have said suddenly an event happened in their life and they felt that everything opened up in front of them. Until then they opened up a Gemara, they saw words. And suddenly they opened up a Gemara and they saw worlds. One of the greatest Talmidei Chassam Sofer, the Maharam Shik, it is said on him when he was young, he had a very, very difficult mind. It was so hard for him to grasp, to retain anything. And one day in the middle of the night he opened up the Yarn Kodesh and he cried his heart out, and suddenly he became the Maharam Shik. Maybe not overnight, but his eyes opened up overnight. Or the meaningless blob suddenly became beautiful words, keys to understanding, major chambers of Torah. The famous story of the Stei Chemed, who literally wrote an encyclopedia of Shas, of Poskim, when he was a young man studying in Koil. He was not known to be a great gadol. He never went to a yeshiva. He just struggled and struggled and struggled. He did, however, evoke the jealousy of one of the balabatim in town, who hired the maid who used to come and clean the Beis HaMedrash to scream one morning that the Stei Chemed had not acted properly. It was a terrible chilul Hashem, although most people never believed the story. The Stei Chemed himself never even knew what happened. The maid, as a result of her involvement in the story, was fired from her job because her boss felt it was a charade. Later on, when the money that she got to engage in this charade was used up, she came herself to the Stei Chemed and cried and said, what should I do now? I don't have any parnasa and I don't have any money left. And she said, I am willing to publicly admit this disgraceful thing that I allowed myself to be part of, and that will clear your name beyond any doubt. But please do me a favor, go to my old boss and help me get my job back. The Stei Chemed tried to weigh his options. On the one hand, if anyone still doubted, and there will always be the gossipers who would, that there was any vestige of truth to the story, this would clear his name altogether. On the other hand, he felt, the mere fact that one Yid can try to conspire to do this against a different Yid would probably be even a greater chilul Hashem than the whole story itself. So ultimately, for Kvod Shemayim, he reasoned, debated, and concluded it is best that the story should stay the way it is, where most people don't believe it anyhow. He doesn't want additional chilul Hashem. He told her, I'll help you get your job back, but please, don't discuss it. Don't tell anyone whether it was true or not true. It's not good. The Stei Chemed walked back into the Beis HaMedrash after he got his job back, opened up the Gemara, and he saw different words. Until then he saw words. Now suddenly there were openings to huge big rooms behind it. There were elevators that carried him up to the Shemei Shemayim. He understood things that he never understood before. He said, Niftuchu loy shari shemayim. He sat down to write about one thing and the entire Torah became clear in his eyes. The Mordechai Yapi, the Mechaber of the Levushim, the Sefer Levush Malchus, a series of Piskei Halachos. He used to be a businessman, a great Talmid Chacham, but a businessman. And once during his business encounters, a certain noble woman approached him to be over in Aveira. He didn't know how to escape, how to run away. The only possible means of escape seemed to be some type of a pipe that was used for sewage And even though he was wearing, as he always did, given his business positions, very fancy and expensive clothes, he didn't think twice. He dove through this pipe and all that was in it. The offensive odor that would come out of his goof and clothes for who knows how many weeks afterwards would not even come into consideration given the possible shash of that same odor coming out of his neshama. He gave up his business dealings afterwards, not wanting to have to face this Messiah again. He started to learn, and the Levush writes, he felt that niftuchu lo shari hashemayim. Suddenly he began to understand things and see things, and he was zecher to a depth and insight that he never had before. And as a tribute to that, he named all of his svarim Levush, clothes. He felt it was putting his clothes through the sewer that cleaned his neshama. Dr. Ksav Sefer, this is Moshe Rabbeinu's message. Limud HaTorah begins always as Yard of Kamoter Likhi. It starts as rain. Rain is a difficult procedure. The 8 Yalam in Oretz, water has to evaporate from the ground, and you have to prepare for the rain. You have to cultivate. You have to dig. You have to plant. You have to plow. And it's frustrating. Sometimes it rains in the wrong time. It rains too early. It rains too late. It rains too much or it rains too little. But you have to keep trying. You have to keep preparing for that right rain at the right time. If you do that long enough, then you are zeicha to the Tizol Katalim Rasi. Then suddenly Torah comes down as Tau. Yes, rain is frustrating sometimes. Person waits all year for that 2-week vacation, and those 2 weeks it rains every single day. Some people get depressed and they give up. Some people just sit down and they start planning their next vacation, hoping for sunnier days in the future. If this is your attitude toward Limud HaTorah, the defeats, the failures, the things that don't work out, only cause you to realign yourself and say, okay, let me try again. Let me try it from a different perspective. Let me try it from a different place. If you treat Torah like rain, eventually the Torah will become a dew. But it's a gradual process. You have to be zeicha to it. I remember when I was an 18-year-old bacher, and I was in a camp, and the color war spirit was in full swing, and I was invited to join. And I always had somewhat of an attraction to plays and things of that nature. And I conferred then with my mashgiach, who said, no, I don't think you should get involved in it. Not at this point in your life. Not at this point during the year. I listened, but I tried to argue back. I explained all the advantages of it, the achtos, the feeling of working with others. And my mashgiach said, taking everything into perspective, for you right now, I feel that it's not right. That was the das Torah at that time. And I remember sitting down in the Medrash, sort of depressed, all that fun going on around me, and here I was, to me at that time, somewhat of a feeling of being alone. I remember opening a Mishnayos and starting to learn, and, well, let me tell you, it was not niftuchu lo shari hashemayim, but I remember understanding things that I never understood before. And I remember things that I learned during those couple of days in the Beis HaMedrash better than things I learned yesterday. There was definitely something special about that Limud HaTorah because it came with Mesiras Nefesh. Unfortunately, unlike in the previous stories, those tzaddikim took advantage of those opportunities to continue on and to be relentless and to never let go. There are windows of opportunity. There are windows of dew that open up in our lives, and sometimes we don't hold on to it. We just taste it and go off on our merry way. But the fact that Torah that comes with any kind of Mesiras Nefesh is a different kind of Torah can be very clear to us if we are willing to think. The Gra says there's another message in the Yar of Kamoter Likhi. Rain comes down to the entire earth. However, how that rain manifests itself, what will grow as a result of the rain, depends on what you plant. If a person plants wheat, then the rain provides wheat for the world. It provides bread, food. It sustains the world. However, if a person plants poison, if a person plants drug fields, cocaine and marijuana grow through rain also, and that brings destruction to the world. So in a sense, that's Moshe Rabbeinu's message to us, explains the Vilna Gaon. Yaris kamata likshi. Torah comes from Shemayim. And the pu'ula of Torah depends what a person plants in his heart. If he's learning Torah l'shem Shemayim because he wants to be better, then the Torah leaves him with greater Yirah Shemayim, greater Emunah. If chas v'shalom Torah roish v'lama, then adarabah. Then the Torah will send him in the opposite direction. Tzadikim yelchu bam, upaishim yikashlu bam. Achitoifel, Doig, Wadoimi. Unfortunately, there are many examples in Tanakh and in history and unfortunately around us of people who use their limit Torah as a vehicle to step over others. There's absolutely no nakuda of sincerity, and that Torah could be dangerous. Zacha nasalei samchayim, loy zacha, it becomes a samamavis. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Kol mi sheyesh bei shloisha dvarim halalu, hu mitalmidav shel Avram Avinu. Ayin toiva, ruach nemucha, nefesh shefala. And whoever has the opposite midos, and ayin ra, ruach gevaya, nefesh shechavay, so the talmidim of Bilam Harash. Frektim is rich and magad. If we're going to analyze midos and decide whether the person is a tzaddik or a rasha, why does the Mishnah say, well, if he has these positive attributes, he is from the talmidim of Avram Avinu? Why not analyze Avram Avinu himself and then contrast that with Bilam himself? Why talmidim of Avram Avinu? Dr. Mizrich Magid, Bilam put on a Rebbe Shalavosh. His clothes were that of a gadol, of a great person. And he had aspects of Nevuah within him. It was hard to tell that Bilam was also not a tzaddik. It can be very confusing sometimes. You have to wait and see ultimately what comes out of it. Ultimately, history would prove those that were in the environment of Avram Avinu, those who were products of Avram Avinu's chinuch, had this special ayin tov, this good eye, this modesty to themselves. They not only proved who they were, they proved who Avram Avinu was. When you saw who the talmidim of Bilam were, their ayin ra, their evil eye, their will always to destroy the other, their level of self-centeredness, they identified Bilam. And that's what the Medrash Simcha says, Divrei Torah is compared to rain. When it rains, anyone who understands the way things grow, what keeps the world alive, looks at the rain and says, this sustains the world. This is the greatest day of blessing. But if you don't understand it, you walk out and you just see water falling on the ground. You don't see any food automatically sprouting up. There's no tuna fish sandwich as a result directly of the rain. It's only after time that you understand the life that the rain brings to the world. Limud HaTorah doesn't always offer instant gratification. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu also begins, Yarev Kamatar Likchi. You learn and you learn and you learn, and eventually you suddenly realize what you have attained for yourself. How your neshama now shines. But it does not necessarily happen overnight. It has to first be, as the Sasemis reiterates basically what we were saying, Yarev Kamatar Likchi, and only after you're willing to plow and be patient enough and wait for the right time, only then are you zeicha to the bracha of Tizel Katau Imrasi. We've mentioned many times that Rambam says that everyone's life story is in Parshas Haazinu. There's a famous story with the Talmud of the Rambam, which we won't go into now. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says Parshas Haazinu is divided into 6 parts. And that's how we divide it when it comes to Kriyas HaTorah. That's how it was divided when they would sing it in the Beis HaMikdash. Haazinu is the first parsha. The second is Zayin, Zechariah, Mesalim. The third, Yarkizehu. The fourth, Vayarashem Vayinat. The fifth, Lulei Kasoyev. The sixth, Kiyad Noshem Amoy. The Torah brings from the Paltu Goyim that the siman is the Rashi Tevis Haziv Lach. The shine is to you. Hey is Haazinu, Zayin is Zechariah, Mesalim, and so on. The Rebbeinu Bechaya said, quote, V'hinei hashira hazois nechama gedoyla, v'havtacha mevularetz be'inyan hagula, u'bi abdei nakum, u'benekamas Yisrael me'eveyem, u'bekaporas Yisrael me'aveneseyem. And that's why the siman is or not lach. Ezra saw when he was Mesader how to read from the Torah. That Kriyas HaTorah will always be with Klal Yisrael throughout Golus. It'll never stop until Mashiach comes. And eventually, through Limud HaTorah and Mesiras Nefesh HaTorah, even in difficult times, Haziv Lach, the shine will be yours. You may undergo difficult periods where that shine is covered up. The coin will have to be polished. What does the Rebbeinu B'chaya conclude? V'tikin hasimen hazeh b'hafsakas ha'parsha hazeh ha'mekubelas atzleinu levayer sheyachzor haziv v'hazoyer v'hateseres liyisrael kebedashayna. Ultimately, through Limud HaTorah, the ziv and the zoyar, the special shine, the beauty for Klal Yisrael will return. V'shavu banim legvulam. The Ber Moshe from the Yoshev Rebbe's Chol is Mevayed of the Shisha Sidri Mishnah. Merum is over here as well. The point is the same. Here is Moshe Rabbeinu's final message to us. It may not come easy, but if you are persistent enough, the Torah represents the shine and the Shari Shemayim that are waiting to be open for you. The Pasuk warns us about what can go wrong if things are going too good. Kapitel Lamed Beis, Pasuk Tezvav, Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivat. Yeshurun refers to Klal Yisrael. As Rav Shmuel Fol Hirsch explains, Yeshurun really designates Klal Yisrael after the ideal of its moral calling, which is Yasher. We have to represent Yashrus. But Yashrus can fall to the wayside when we're laden with excesses and when things are going a little too good. And therefore the Pasuk says, Vayishman Yeshurun, that Yeshurun was sort of waxed with fat, and as a result, Vayivat, instead of appreciation, Vayivat, he begins to kick. If we look back at the course of our history, in suffering, for the most part, Klal Yisrael proved themselves splendid. But it seldom stood up to the same Nisayan when the difficulty was dealing with good fortune. When Shemanta Avisa Kasisa, the Pasuk goes on, when we were overwhelmed with the fat, when things were going real good for us, unfortunately the result led to Vayitash Eloka Asahu, Vayinabel Su Yishiyasai. Then it forsook the Rebbeinu Shalom who made it and considered worthless Su Yishiyasai, the rock of its salvation. The greatness of the Chavetz Chaim, I once heard, was not pilpul. It was not some sharp vertel. It was teaching a pasuk, like we're soon going to see how the Chavetz Chaim translates this pasuk in its most simplistic form, and in the pashtus, give us the real message of this pasuk in such a way that it ought to shake the very fiber of our being. We can read this pasuk 100 times and never see it the way the Chavetz Chaim simply touched the words. The Chavetz Chaim gives us the following mashal. There were two sisters. One married a very rich, prominent person. The other married into poverty. Many years passed after their marriage. One lived in a glorious home that was the envy of anyone who passed by, the talk of the town. The other sister lived in a shack. And once the sister who was married to the poor person came to visit the sister who was married to the rich person. She was overwhelmed. She never even saw a mansion like that. She couldn't believe this was her sister's home, that she was the queen of this place. She knocked on the door, and some servants came out and looked at her with disdain. Dressed in rags, they pointed to the little schedule on the doorpost that let people know when they can come and ask for tzedakah. She said, no, I didn't come to ask for tzedakah. I want to visit my sister. And who exactly is your sister? My sister is the lady of this house. She's the wife. Then they noticed that there was some resemblance in the face. So sure enough, they went to inquire. And the lady of the house came running, my sister is here. Well, let her in, let her in. She walks in, she's astounded. If the outside of the house was nice, it was nothing like the inside of the house. Every vessel was dotted with the most brilliant diamonds. She never saw such nice furniture. She was overwhelmed by the glitter of the chandelier. She almost sank into the carpet. The marble on the wall imported from all different places. And she couldn't help but look at her sister's hands and see the rings and the size of those diamonds on those rings. The clothes she was wearing. The clothes that her servants were wearing. Her servants were dressed nicer than she was. And then she would see the way her sister would pull a cord or snap a finger, and people would come running from all sides with cakes and cookies, juice. What do you need, madam? Anything. Well, you are to please treat my sister with loyalty. And the two sisters sat down by the table to schmooze a little bit. But after the initial shock, and after the glory of the moment set in, the poor sister began to notice something on the face of her rich sister. She said, look, we don't have the same kind of clothes. We don't have the same kind of jewelry. I don't have jewelry at all. But our faces are still similar. I'm still an expert on your face, my dear rich sister. Why are you so sad? I mean, I'm looking around at this and I'm marveling at it. I haven't seen a house like this, not even in a museum, not even in pictures of palaces of kings. And you live here. You're the queen of this home. But I look at your face, and if I can just set aside the jewelry, I see sadness. I see depression. Why? What are you sad about? I have nothing like this. I live in a shack on a dust floor, and me and my husband sit and we break our heads every single night to figure out how we can pay the bills of the next day and just make it. Why are you sad? Why are you so depressed, my rich sister? The rich sister closed the curtains to make sure no one was listening, and she said, well, you are my sister, and I can confide with you. I feel I have very serious marital problems. My husband is very rude to me. Rude to you, the poor sister asked. Rude to you? Look at the clothes you're wearing. Look at the jewelry you have. Look at this home you live in. Look at that carriage and those white horses parked up, but how can you say that your husband is rude to you? So the rich sister said, let me explain something to you. In terms of material, I get whatever I want. Material wealth I have. I can snap my fingers and I can have the most expensive steak for breakfast, lunch, and supper. My husband gives me whatever I want. But you know something? When he talks to me, my opinion means absolutely nothing. Never mind when he has to make big business decisions. And I dare suggest anything. He looks at me with what's this look like? Who are you? Who are you to even suggest to me what I should do or not? What's your opinion? Do you know I can't even say anything in this house? If I want something changed in the house, I get to look at, what do you know from the background where you come from? Don't tell me how to decorate my house. I'm a nothing. Do you understand that? You look at me, you look at my expensive clothes, you look at my riches, you look at my jewelry, you look at all of this luxurious life that is whizzing around me, and I feel like a nothing. My husband does not consider my intelligence worth any more than the dust on your floor. And I'm telling you, I'm looking at you, my dear sister, dressed in rags, and I envy what you said before. You said you and your husband sit down to break your heads. How are you going to make it through the next day? That means you sit down with your husband and you discuss things. You have ideas, he has ideas. You're a team. You have a brain in his eyes. I don't have that. Not in my husband's eyes. All of this affluence is not worth it for me. The Chavetz Chaim tells us a frightening nimshal. He says you have people that are going to dress the Torah in the most silk cloth. They're going to build an Aron Kodesh in the Beis HaMikdash and have their names on a plaque, and the Aron Kodesh is going to loom high. It's going to be an amazing structure. Marble and pillars and gold. And they're going to buy the most expensive crown for the Sefer Torah. They're going to put the most beautiful jewelry, golden bells, silver pomegranates will ring from this illustrious Sefer Torah that everyone will come to see. The Sefer Torah that so-and-so was menadib to the Beis HaMikdash. That Keli the beautiful shulchan, the bima. What an Torah he has on his talus. It's all very nice. But the Torah HaKadosh says, thank you very much, I appreciate this. But on the other hand, I don't even need this. I don't need it if when it comes to my opinion, I don't exist. I'm screaming what the Tajik mitzvahs are. You totally ignore me. Who am I to be any deciding factor in your life? To be even something to reckon with? You don't consult with me. You eat what you want. You go where you want. Shabbos means nothing to you. And the Torah is crying. The Torah says, take off my jewelry. I don't need it. Just don't step on me. And sometimes, says the Chafetz Chaim, you look at the poor Kehilos in Klal Yisrael. They can't put on the same kind of silk mantle to the Sefer Torah. And no, they don't have a gold crown for the Sefer Torah or a silver pointer, but they're no kavod to the Sefer Torah. Al pia yetzu v'al pia yavayu. What the Torah says is what they do. They consult with Das Torah before they do anything, before they turn either right or left. This poverty is much more appreciated by the Torah than the riches that are scattered about it. When, if you take a closer look at the face of the Sefer Torah wearing the jewelry, it is sad. And if you take a look at only 2 words in Rashi on this Sedra, and you understand how the Chafetz Chaim learned Pshat in this Rashi, you see this whole mashal playing itself out. Shamanta, Avisa, Kasisa, you're so full, you're laden with fat, and as a result, you forsake Hashem. Vayita shalikaso. The Hashem has made you Vayanabel Sur Yeshuasai. It's like Rashi, what does Vayanabel Sur Yeshuasai mean? You take all of these riches and Gino Bezo. You are disgracing and embarrassing the Torah with it. How are you embarrassing the Torah? So Rashi quotes a pasuk in Yecheskel. Achireim of Hechel Hashem. What does Rashi mean with this pasuk? The Navi Yecheskel says, you have a big, beautiful Hechel. You're spending all this money on the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash. It's gorgeous. It's an amazing building. What an edifice. People are coming from the entire world to see it. It's the envy of the universe. But what good is it if you're standing with your backs toward it? If when it comes to advice and hadracha, all of this gold means nothing to you, you're turning away from it, that it's useless. Then the wife of the house is crying with her jewelry. It means nothing to her. You're adorning her externally, and internally you're telling her, you mean nothing to me. There is no greater bizayon to the Torah when you honor it on the outside and dismiss it on the inside. Now, is this really what the pasuk means when the pasuk uses such a strong lashon as vayenabel, that you're adorning the Torah on the outside, but there's not enough on the inside? Can you justify, you hear such a powerful lashon that you consider the Torah repulsive? So Rashi, yes. After quoting the pasuk in Yecheskel of Achireim al Hechel Hashem, Rashi says, a nivul gadol mizeh. There is no greater statement of, you are repulsive than this. When you say, here, take what you want. I'll give you your own credit card, just don't bother me. As long as I don't have to listen to your advice. The Chafetz Chaim used to quote Rav Shlomo Klieger, who commanded that he should be buried in the cemetery next to the poor people. He said, even if they're not chachamim. Rav Shlomo pleaded with the Chevra Kedisha, place him next to the poor people who are not Talmidei Chachamim, more so than the rich people who are Talmidei Chachamim. He said, Anius and Torah to sort of go hand in hand. And whatever Torah the army is Isaac in stands on a far greater level than a person who learns Torah with peace of mind. Now, poverty is not necessarily financial poverty. It means when a person is troubled, when a person is under pressure, and he opens up that sefer, that is the Torah that stands out. And being that it is the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, perhaps I can take the liberty to speak to myself out loud a little bit. There's that famous joke of a car that had an accident. It skidded off the road. Everyone was knocked unconscious, but no one was seriously hurt. So the policeman came by, and the only one he found that he could interview was a monkey. So he asked the monkey, you were in the car? The monkey nodded yes. So let me ask you some questions, the policeman said to him. What was the father doing in the car? So the monkey held up like a telephone while he was talking on the phone. What was the mother doing? So the monkey made with his hands like the mother was knitting. What were the children doing? The monkey started pressing buttons though they were playing with their Game Boys. And by the way, what were you doing? Asked the policeman. So the monkey makes with his hands like he's holding on to a steering wheel. In other words, I was the one who was driving. In an era of absentee parentism, when we have a situation where in many homes, necessity drives both parents out to work, and we leave our children home. We leave them in a home that has all the trappings of Torah and mitzvahs. I mean, imagine if a shtetl yid who grew up in poverty in a shack, in a mud shack, came to our houses, and he saw the beautiful mezuzah on the door. He saw the tremendous svarim shank that came with the chatzana furniture, the beautiful shas behind the glass, the shulchan aruch, the svarim. And he saw the gorgeous pictures of tzaddikim on the wall. He would be amazed. He would say how great Torah has ridden. The crown of Torah has been restored to its glory. And then he'll walk into the den. No doubt, en route he's going to see many more bookcases that are going to have all the latest English svarim and beautiful stories. And in the den, he will see a child sitting there in front of a box, and one is going to explain to him that this is a computer. What is he doing on this computer? He's either playing a game for hours on end, or he's surfing the net, Rahman al-Islam, uncovering the secrets of the universe, the good ones and the bad ones. This guest from the shtetl may walk into the kitchen. He'll open the refrigerator with permission, and he'll see 2 hashgachas on every item. One with the name of a rav from Europe, another symbol of a national organization. Kashrus. Look, 2 separate kitchens. A milchig sink and a fleishig sink, a milchig stove and a fleishig stove, unheard of. Where he comes from, has Yiddishkeit risen onto a pedestal. And then he's going to see a Polish guy to come in and serve the food to the child. And he's going to see a little toddler walk in and cuddle up to the one that is, for all practical purposes, raising the child most of the hours a day. And he's going to see the child sitting there on the lap of this person, and the person is going to sing a nice little Polish lullaby to the child. So much love. What is this Yid from the shtetl going to think? He's going to say these people are out of their minds. They have adorned the Torah with riches. They have made external Yiddishkeit something to be very proud of. Look at the payers of those children. But when it comes to whose opinion counts, who is directing their lives, who's being mechanech them, they entrust it to a machine? They give the child a key to the world and they say, here's a big world, all of its pitfalls, all of the greatest tumais that ever existed. Here, child, keep yourself busy. Sit in your luxurious home. I'll be back for supper. And take a tour of the world. Leave the Torah right here. Don't let it get in your way. Just let it stand there. This Yid from the shtetl is going to say these people are out of their mind. I'll run back to my house that does not have such a nice mezuzah. I'll go back to my tefillin that may have not been made out of the thick hide. I'll go back to my city where maybe there was one shas in the whole city. But at least whatever Gemaras were there dictated our lives. We listened to them. Those svarim were mechanech our children. At least we weren't drugged with some type of a Game Boy or a Game Gear. And keeping a child quiet for hours and hours by having him knock off people's heads and feet and legs. I fear that Yid in the shtetl is going to say, keep your jewelry. I'd rather be in a relationship where people value my opinion. And you know something else? This Yid in the shtetl didn't have to scratch his head and say, why is my son such a mechutzif to me? Did you ever? I would have never said to my father, or my father would have never said to his grandfather, no, absolutely not. I'm not doing it. I don't care what you want. Can you imagine what today is, what Tafshin Samach is, what the year 2000 is? It's not the Tafshin Samach. People by nature will respect those that guide them, those that direct them. So if we simply don't have the time to be mechanech our children, and we turn them over to mechanical devices, then they will have the respect of those devices. And then we have no one to blame but ourselves. You cannot buy a child a space station and wonder why he's spaced out. Don't be surprised. You ought not to be surprised any more than turning over the steering wheel to a monkey and wondering why you wound up off the road. Parshas Haazinu may not be the last parsha in the Torah officially, but it is the last parsha that we read on Shabbos. Zayis HaBracha doesn't have a Shabbos. Zayis HaBracha is read on Simchas Torah. This is not without significance, explains the Pesach. Of course, the Zayis HaBracha is part of the Torah, and if you're missing a letter of the Zayis HaBracha, then the entire Sefer Torah is possible. However, there is an idea that the Zayis HaBracha is already an intermediary between Torah Shebeksav and Torah Shebal Peh. Even the Gemara talks about the last 8 psukim of Parshas Zayis HaBracha and asks, well, how can the pasuk say Vayomas Moshe and Moshe Rabbeinu continues to write? And some say Yeshua wrote it, and others say that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it with tears. You're not supposed to be mafsik by the last 8 parshiyos of V'zayis HaBarach. You're not supposed to stop in the middle. So whether it's the last 8 sukkim, and in a sense explains the entire parsha, it's already the bridge between Torah Shebeksav and Torah Shebal Peh. That's why it doesn't have its own Shabbos. It comes on Yom Tov. And who is Koveya which day Yom Tov should be? Bezdin. Chazal, the Torah, gave this koyach to Bezdin to determine which day is Rosh Chodesh and subsequently which day is Yom Tov. So in a sense, the fact that we read the V'zayis HaBaracha on Yom Tov represents the Kedusha of Torah Shebal Peh, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu considers it as important as Chol Chisav, that it was given to Moshe Rabbeinu and transmitted to us on Har Sinai together with Torah Shebeksav. But as a result, getting back to Parshas Haazinu, that means in a sense that Parshas Haazinu wraps up Torah Shebeksav. And that's why the Rambam says, explains the Tzaddik, that in Parshas Haazinu you have the life story of every single Yid. There is a code in Parshas Haazinu. There's the famous story of Avner, the Talmud of the Ramban who rebelled, and the Ramban later told him where his life story is in Parshas Haazinu, which we won't go into now. But the Ramban says that your life story, my life story, the life story of every single Yid is in Parshas Haazinu. And we know, explains the Tzaddik, the Zohar says, Yisrael is Rashi Tevois, Yesh, Shishim, Ribu, Yosef, L'Torah. There were approximately 600,000 and some odd Yidden that were Makabel the Torah. And there are approximately that amount of letters in the Torah, and every single Yid corresponds to a letter. Every single Yid has a letter in Torah Shebeksav that is his letter, where his neshama draws its source of Kedusha from. So Parshas Haazinu, which in a sense is the last Torah Shebeksav, official Torah Shebeksav Parsha, that has within it sort of a chazara of all the Yidden that have their neshamas dispersed throughout the letters of the entire Torah. Like when you write a shtar, when you write a contract, the halach is in the last line of the shtar, you have to quickly present a synopsis, a short summary of the basics of the shtar, all that is included in the shtar. Parshas Haazinu, which brings to an end the official kriya for Shabbos, that has within it a summary of all of the Yidden, all of the nefashis of Klal Yisrael who have their oisias throughout the entire Torah. And if someone has the Ruach HaKodesh of the Ramban, he can pick a pasuk in Parshas Haazinu and say, here's your life story, here's a summary of your life. I read once that when a Moshe Rabbeinu got the bitter yediyah, the tragic news of the passing of his beloved son-in-law, Rav Shivgal, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. So he didn't want that anyone else should know until the morning. He said, let them only start suffering later. And he paced his room back and forth, and he repeated this pasuk, the pasuk from this week's Sedra. Hatzur tamim ta'olai. Literally, the rock, his work is perfect. Ki chal derach of mishpat, for all his ways are justice. Kei lamuna, the ein avel, tzadik v'yashahu. So the Archaim HaKadosh, we just had very powerful promises in the first 3 psukim of this Sedra. Very impressive. Havtachos from HaKadosh Baruch. The Torah promised us that if we are Isaac in Torah properly, we will have all the dew and the rain in the world that we need. And sometimes the person looks around, and he's puzzled. You have a Talmud Chacham who sits and learns from morning until night, struggles to understand every word of the Taisus, every thought of a Rashba, and yet there's a pile of bills on his desk that is becoming a little threatening to him. On the other hand, you look on the other side of the street and you see a person that has no yoke of Torah on him at all. To the contrary, you have someone else who makes fun and is even repulsed by those who learn Torah. And the only thing that piles up on his desk are the many receipts of his well-going business and the many plans that travel agencies are sending him for his next vacation, the one for this month. And a person may observe this and say, let me look at that Chumash again. What does the pasuk say? The Torah promises, Yarav kamata lichchi tiva katalim rasi. The more Torah someone learns, the more rains, the more malachta inasa yedei acherim. How does that fit with my 2 neighbors over here? The Talmud Chacham on one side of the street and that other person on the other side of the world. Dr. Archaim HaKadosh, therefore the pasuk is saying, whatever the Torah promised for Loimdei Torah is emes li'amitai. And the lack of bracha for lack of Torah is emes li'amitai. Don't be confused by what you see, because you don't understand everything you see. Hatzur tamim pa'al, what Hashem does is perfect. You see a Talmid Chacham that is struggling? Tamim pa'al, what Hashem does is perfect. You see that haughty person who is having it so good, kichol derachav mishpat. The tzaddik may have been over certain inyanim, dakastik inyanim, very fine inyanim, and in order for him to have a clean slate, li'olam haba, this particular tzaddik, for whatever reason, has to endure these difficulties. The Rasha, by the same token, may have done some things right, or triggered some things right, even in the form of a ripple effect. And for that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is measuring out his schar spoonful for spoonful. Everything is just. And you may not understand it on this world, but the pasuk says, Keil Amunah. The Rebbeinu Shalom will give the tzaddik every ounce of reward that was promised to him, that is due to him. Chazal say, Keil Amunah l'shalim l'tzadikim tzidkasam li'olam haba. The Ein Avel. There is no injustice by the Rebbeinu Shalom. If the Rasha did something that caused the right thing to happen, he has to be rewarded for that, regardless of the apparent chilul l'Hashem. So you can look at the Shalvas HaRashoyim. You can look at that late model car by that person across the street who would never even think of walking into a Beis HaMedrash and say, what is going on over here? Or you could say what David HaMelech said. David HaMelech said, if the Rashayim have it so good for even the ripple effects of some good deed that they may have triggered either directly or inadvertently, Kadosh Baruch Hu is so careful. So Keil Amunah, can you imagine what reward awaits the tzaddikim? And therefore, to the Yerushalayim HaKadosh, touch the pasuk this way: Keil Amunah. Your heart should be full with Amunah, full with hope and anticipation for the unimaginable, undescribable schar that there are for tzaddikim liyasid lavai. V'haraya v'ein avel. You see how Kadosh Baruch Hu is so makpid to pay back schar, that even for the Rishayim, he says, no, they must be paid for the little good things that they may have triggered on this world. And this pasuk is in Parshas Haazinu, because Parshas Haazinu, the tzaddik says, represents the summary of the life of every single yid, based on the Rambam. And there is no life that doesn't run into this question at least once. Wow. There is no person that doesn't experience this Nisayon at least once in his life of trying to understand why it's tzaddik the Rasha the Toivalai. And therefore, it is this parsha that speaks to everyone, that represents everyone, that has the ruchnius, the genetic code, so to speak, of every single neshama, that cries to us this lesson. You will face nisyonis, you can either let it destroy you, or you can make David HaMelech kal v'chomer. Once again, as the Yerushalayim HaKadosh explains it, Keil Amunah, can you imagine how trusted HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to pay back the reward for Erlich HaYidin, for those who fulfill his mitzvahs, if he ain't Avel, if he won't even allow any misjustice to the biggest Rishayim? Well, let us turn to a different question now. The Ramban tells us that our life stories are spelled out in Parshas Haazinu. Of course, there are elements of Bechira, our free choice, which runs into the Rambam's general question of Bechira and Yediyah, how that works coinciding with each other. But we won't go into that now. We'll leave that for a different time. For now, let me share with you a memra that I heard a person repeat, B'Shem Godel Echad. I don't know if this Godel would be maskim that we should repeat it in his name, but he's one of the perhaps major poskim, Bizman Hazeh. This Yid went to ask this posek a very difficult question. Probably one of the most difficult questions that any Rav can have. His elderly mother, indeed she was in her high 90s, but she was still his mother. And there were the regular questions of, she was in a coma, respirator, medications, to prolong life, is this life? Obviously, we will not get into that. And the Rav paskined whatever he paskined. And at the end, before he walked out, he said to Lucy, what's your mother's name? I'm going to be mispal for, she should have a refuah shalema. So this person was a little taken aback by that. And he asked him a question. He said, don't some of the Svarim say that if someone is mispal for something that is shaloi k'derech hateva, according to others, that is a tefillah shav. One doesn't even have a right to be mispal for that. And don't Svarim say this person who was experiencing a lot of pain then cry to the Rav that there is a mazel, there's a certain amount that a person has to live, and that's it. When you see it comes to the end, it comes to the end. What is the point of tefillah? There are certain people, they have a mazel, whether it's to be poor, whether it's to be rich, whether it's to be sick or to be healthy, whether it's to be happy or sad, and that's the way it is. Isn't that their mazel? Isn't that their pasuk in Parshas Haazinu? Isn't that what their pasuk cries out? So it can't be changed. What's the point of being mispalel? And the Rav said to him, I will answer you based on Hasidus, based on Kabbalah, and based on Halacha. First of all, this inyan, whether if a person has a mazel, whether that mazel can be changed, is a machlokes. There are conflicting opinions in the Gemara, in the Shayim about this. Yesh mazel li Yisrael, ein mazel li Yisrael. Gemara in Saita talks about zivugim. On the one hand it says, Abraham Yom Kodim Yitzir Savlad, Machrizim, they announced, Min HaShemayim, Bach Pliny LaPliny, 40 days even before the child is created. The Baskol rings down HaShemayim, it says who's going to marry whom. On the other hand it says, ein mizdavgin la'adam al-lafi ma'asav, a person meets his mate based on his actions. And the Shainim over there, they all deal with this inyan. Rosh Hashanah will determine what's going to happen throughout the year. Could it still be changed with tefillah, so on and so on. So you have different opinions in the Gemara. And the Gemara doesn't paskin ois. The Gemara doesn't rule definitively one way or another. Tzaddikim of later generations paskined that a yid could influence through his tefillah anything. Everything is shaykh. Every klal in the world has a chutz min klal. Why the Gemara didn't paskin? How can later generations paskin? There are many instances where the Gemara leaves it open, and based on the klalim of Psak, so we have to be machriya. The later poskim have to be machriya one way or another. They have to tell us what to do. So you look at some of the later Sifrei Chasidus, Sifrei Musar, you'll see B'tachin, look at the Chayvus Avavas, he says B'tachin can change the entire world. He paskin like this man diyama. And halachas kibasroi. You can have different opinions in the Gemara about anything, whether an animal is kosher or treif, whether something is muktzah or not. We paskin according to the Achrayim, the way they paskin, the later poskim that are accepted by Klal Yisrael. Furthermore, let me answer you al-pi Kabbalah. In the times of the Gemara, most of the neshamas were original neshamas that were sent down to this world to do whatever they were supposed to do, whatever their message, whatever their code in Parshas Haazinu says they are supposed to do. Bizman Hazeh, the Arizal says, 99.99% of us, we're not here for the first time, we're here, we were sent down again and again, because we have to straighten out what we either didn't accomplish, or even worse, distorted or messed up, so to speak, in our previous Gogol. So these in Yonim, that there was a definitive mazel, and it is written out, the person has to be poor, the person has to be rich, whether things have to go his way or the bedafka will not go his way, many of those in Yonim that the Gemara discusses are going to be the way they are, and it can't be changed. That refers to the person's original mission down here in this world. Subsequent mission, where we are sent down again and again to make up what we didn't accomplish the first time. So here, there's more flexibility. Because the person went through his gezeh already. If there were a person had a mazel that he had to be rich or poor, it could be he already experienced those years of richness and poorness. He was just sent down to daven a certain mincha, to do a certain chesed, to be mesak in a certain inyan. As a result, everything else need not necessarily be binding and could be changed through koyach hatfilah. And the third thing that he told him, he said, I'll tell you a teretz, al pi halacha, al pi lamdis, which seems like the simplest of the other answers, but if you think about it, in this simplicity, you see an unbelievable greatness, a mind-boggling chiddush. Let us say, there are certain inyanim where even in tefillah it is unacceptable. The Mishnah says in Masechus Brachos, someone enters into a city, and he hears terrible screams and shouts, and he says, Yehirotzim, that should not be coming from my house. Or his wife is already expecting a child, and it's after 40 days, and he's mispowered whether it should be a nekeva or a zachar. There is a tefillah shot. And yes, there are certain shitas that say that if a person is mispalel to be meshana teva, it's also a tefillah shot. There are such opinions in the Rishonim. A yid, however, is mispalel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What is he mispalel? It doesn't have to be such a oiber chacham. It doesn't have to tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu exactly what he wants should happen. But he says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I am in an Eistzara, I perceive that an Eistar is coming, I am frightened, I am scared, and he cries out, Rabbeinu Shalom, Ana Hashem, Ha'ishiyana. He cries, Rabbeinu, who else should I talk to if not to you? And let us say, technically speaking, in terms of the tefillah itself, the mechanics of tefillah cannot change it. But you know what could change it? The schus that the Yid has, that he turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even though it's an impossible situation. Al Pi Cheshbon, this Yid should say, I'm an Eisara. No. According to certain sheets in the Rishonim, there's no mokum to be mispal over here. So forget it. Why should I open up a Tilim? But Lamaisa, the Yid doesn't do that. Lamaisa, the Yid opens up his Tilim anyway. The Yid starts giving tzedakah anyway. And the Yid cries out to the Rabbeinu Shalom anyway. He says, I don't know how these things work. All I know is the Rabbeinu Shalom help. Even if the tefillah doesn't work, but the schus that the Yid goes and he's mispal even under such circumstances, that schus can change teva. And the Emes in my bit says that the purpose of tefillah is not that we get what we want, because we don't know what's good for us. The purpose of tefillah is the acknowledgement that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you are the one who is pulling the strings. You are the one that gives chiyus, that gives breath to everything in this life. And whatever experience I am going through is directly your order. You're the one that can change it. You're the one that can maintain it. Of course, with the Yid tefillah, he changes things for the better. But the major objective for tefillah is that acknowledgement. And sometimes, where even the circumstances are such that tefillah cannot change it, the acknowledgement that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everything that could change it. And to a great degree, that is the inyan that the schach of the sukkah has to be completely natural. It has to grow from the ground. You cannot fashion it into a utensil. We deal directly with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It has to be able to rein in, because this is our statement. We can build the most secure roof in the world, but it doesn't guarantee that we won't be rained upon. We can and we ought to try and do and plan to protect ourselves, but ultimately our menuchas nefesh is in your hands, Rabbeinu Shalom. And there's nothing we can do to guarantee it. And that acknowledgement is the greatest chus of all. Hatzur tamim palei kichal derachav mishpat. Whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is perfect. Tamim. You may or may not understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things, but the reality is, regardless of your ability to comprehend it, kichal derachav mishpat. All of its ways are just. We have to understand, however, the meaning of the word ki over here in the pasuk. It appears that the context of ki over here means pikor. In other words, it's a mesinas tam. It's an explanation. Hatzur tamim palei. Why is it whatever Hashem does is perfect? Kichal derachav mishpat. So how do we understand this? Whatever Hashem does is perfect because all of His ways are just? It's not so much because all of His ways are just. The emphasis is, even though you don't understand why certain things happen, despite that you should know whatever Hashem does is just. But how do you fit in the because whatever Hashem does is just over here in the pasuk? Furthermore, we seem to be switching back and forth between the plural and the singular. Hatzur tamim pa'alei. That's singular. His work is perfect. Then we switch to Lashon Rabim. Kichal derachav, for all of His ways, that's Lashon Rabim, plural. Our mishpat, again, Lashon Yachid. We start singular, we go to plural, then come back to singular. Beautiful words from the Binyamin Diskin in the Sefer Be'er Ra'i. He uses the mashal of a watch, but let's try to understand this a little bit more in terms of what we see today. Imagine if I took a Boeing 747, a huge airliner, and imagine I took a screwdriver, or whatever it would take, and I take it apart piece by piece, and I spread it out over the field of a baseball stadium. 5 million pieces. Everything from the engine, the computer systems, the chips, the wheels, the seats, the earphones, the glass, the wings, everything broken apart into the smallest pieces possible without totally breaking it. And someone sits in the stands of the stadium and he looks at these millions and millions of pieces. And I would ask this person, what do you see? And he will tell me, I see some type of, I don't know, the biggest yard sale that ever existed. Looks like someone really emptied out his basement, or thousands of people emptied out their basements. There's everything here from wheels to glass to seats to engines to rotors to tanks of gas, pieces of metal, screws. And look how many basements have been emptied out. I mean, I can't even see the end of this. What if I went and I told this person, you should know that every single thing you see over here, the thousands and thousands of components, are really all part of one machine. This person would be either astounded, or he would look at me as if, how many bottles of schnapps did you drink last night? I see miles and miles of pieces. You're telling me this is all part of one machine? I see layers and layers of screws, of things of different shapes and sizes that apparently have no connection to each other whatsoever. You're telling me this is all one unit? This is 1,000 junkyards that have been dumped over here. That's what it looks like. Then I will turn to the person and I will say, relax. Take a deep breath and watch what's going to happen. I snap my fingers and I bring hundreds and hundreds of engineers and workers. Everyone has his job. He picks up the wheel. The other person picks up components of the engine. He picks up the seats. And it may take a couple of days or a couple of weeks or even a year. But slowly but surely, the end product is a huge, big 747 airliner is standing over here in the stadium ready to take off. I can't blame the person for being skeptical. What he saw were thousands and thousands of different pieces that seemingly had no connection to each other. Only someone who understands the mechanics of how this works and what was done over here could even begin to imagine that this is really part of one airplane. The word tamim means complete, a complete keli. If you have a whole glass, it's a complete glass. If there's a chip broken off, it's no longer a complete glass. But that's easy to see because a glass is a glass. If you have an airliner, then you have to have all the components of the airliner. If you're missing the throttle, or you're missing a lever, or you're missing a light, or you're missing an engine, not a complete airliner. But that's much more difficult to see, especially before you put it together. As a matter of fact, it's almost impossible to see. There's a famous Weltmarshal, 10 blindfolded people all felt an elephant. One of them came back and said, an elephant is like a huge wavy carpet. He felt the ears. And the other one came back and argued and said, no, an elephant is like a long, long garden hose. He felt the trunk. Another person said, no, an elephant is like a huge, huge pillar. He felt the feet, and so on and so on. Because they did not see the whole thing, each one had a very limited perspective based on what he was able to feel. Therefore, each one decided he knew what an elephant is. Each one was right, but on the other hand, their inability to see the whole thing caused them to argue with each other. Each of these 10 blindfolded people came back and said, you don't know what you're talking about. Your description of the elephant is totally off. It has no shaykhus whatsoever to what an elephant really feels like. In a way, this explains the fallacy of Avodah Zarah. The Goyim were under the impression that it cannot be that there is one force that dominates this world, because there are so many obvious or apparent contradictions. There's Tov, there's Ra. You have in this world the purest, the finest, the sweetest. And then you have such evil that whenever you think that it can't get any worse, someone comes up with an even greater diabolical plan. How could it be that all of these forces come from the same source? You can experience in your life, on any given day, the epitome of happiness, and then be faced with such fear and overwhelming challenges. How can all of this come from the same source? So therefore, the Ummah Ha'olam came to the conclusion, the same way the blindfolded people who touched the elephant did, they came to the conclusion that there are different parts over here, and it's not connected. It has no shaykhus to each other. There are koichos hatov, There are koiches hara. And therefore, if you wanted money, you had to serve the avodah zarah of money. If you wanted health, you had to serve the avodah zarah of health. It had no shaykhs to each other. You may be good with one particular avodah zarah and not good with another one. Therefore, one person can be rich and he's not healthy, another is healthy and he's not rich. When Avraham Avinu came and he taught the world, no, there's one Bayei Olam. There's one Manig Esabriya. There's one person who sustains us. So to the world, that made as much sense as someone who never saw an airplane before in his life, and you showed him these thousands and thousands of pieces, and you told him this is all part of one unit, of one keli. Moshe Rabbeinu explained, Hatzur Tamim Pa'alai. Pa'al Echad, Yatzar HaKol. There's only one force, there's only one Bayei Olam that created everything. Tamim. And he created something complete. Complete shleimus, complete tmimus. That is this world at large. That is every human being. That is an Olam Katan. But you're going to stop and ask a kasha, and you're going to say, but there appear to be so many contradictions. Life changes so quickly, from a beautiful dream to a nightmare, and vice versa. In my own life, I've experienced so many ups and downs. How do I associate this? How do I say it all comes from one source? How do I say it all comes from one Bayei Olam? And the answer is, you don't understand it. Kichal derachav mishpat. Because all of his ways are just. Although HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to be engaged in different things, and he created things that are so contradictory, things that are so beautiful to things that are apparently so evil, all of that exists in this world, even though it appears kichal derachav, that there are many different ways going in all different directions, and they are not associated to each other. They are completely different. There are pillars, there are carpets, there are hoses, they're not connected. There are different forces going in different directions. It appears as if it is derachav loshin rabim, but you should know the reality is it's mishpat, it's just. It's just that you don't see the complete picture. You don't understand it. At the point that you are privy only to your limited perspective of whether it's the feet or the ears or the trunk, then you have to be minded that there is a Bayei Olam that puts all of this together. The Sefer Tuchei Yabib brings a fascinating mashal. We know Chazal tell us Rabbi Akiva was brought out to be executed by the Romans. So the angels in heaven began to scream and cry. They said, Rabbeinu Shalom, Zu Torah v'Zu Schara? Is this the Torah and is this the reward for the Torah? That Rabbi Akiva should die such a horrible death? The Romans raked his skin? And the HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered them, Im eshma koil achar, if I hear one more koil, ehefach esoilim, I will turn over the entire world of soil v'doyu. It'll be vanity, it'll be nothing. I'll destroy the world if you say one more thing. Quiet. So the Malachim were quiet. They didn't want the world to be destroyed. The problem is, but what is the answer to their question of Zu Torah v'Zu Schara? How come the HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't answer them? How come the HaKadosh Baruch Hu just said, if you say one more word, I'll destroy the world? So he brings a Mayr Mashal. There was a king who wanted a new outfit. And he was determined this outfit should be the liking of such that no other king in the world had. And he invested vast amounts of money in acquiring 5 meters of the most expensive linen or satin in the world. And he found the Jewish tailor. And he said, make me my robe. And the tailor worked. He labored. He was very loyal. He was very careful. And he really produced a beautiful product. And when the king put it on, he was so proud. He was the envy of all kings. And the Jewish tailor was the envy of all of his colleagues. So they went to the king, and they began to slander him. They said, you should know that he stole from you. He took off some of the linen, and he sold it or made his own clothes with it. The haraya, they can even prove it to the king. You purchased 5 meters of this linen, of this beautiful linen, and take a look at your robe. You will see there are only 4 over there. One, he siphoned there for himself and made himself his own clothes, or perhaps even for some other king. at your expense. Although the king wasn't listening to them till now, but now the evidence seemed very incriminating. What possible answer can there be to this? He gave them 5 meters, and there are only 4. So he summoned the Jewish tailor, and he yelled at him, "How dare you do this?" The tailor said, "I didn't do anything. I was so loyal, so careful. Whatever you gave me went into the robe that you're wearing." "Liar," said the king. "I gave you 5, and you gave me a robe that contains only 4. Do you think I'm a fool? You think I don't realize you took off 1 for yourself?" Adoni Melech, the Yid answered, "If you understand how you take material and make clothes out of it, then you will understand that you have to cut away parts, that when you sew it together, you fold over different parts. Automatically, you lose about 1/5 of the material, that you don't see it if you're going to spread it out and measure it. That's a perfectly acceptable ratio. Ask any tailor." But the king was not appeased. "Liar! Don't give me your stories. If I give you 5 and you give me back 4, that means you took off 1 for yourself." So the Yid said, "Your Majesty, let me have the robe and I will show you." And he began to rip open the stitches, to open up the folds, to let down the hem, to lift the collar. He began to undo the robe, turn it back into a flat piece of material to show the king that all 5 are here. However, when he started to do that, the king got even more furious. He said, "How dare you? How dare you destroy my robe?" And the tailor said, "Your Majesty, if you won't believe me, I have no other way of proving to you that all 5 are here." When Rabbi Akiva was being led to his execution, so the angels looked at this, and they saw, even though they were angels, but they saw the ultimate contradiction. Zu Torah v'zu Chara, this is the man who was Meiser Nefesh himself for Limud HaTorah, who came from the depths, who came from Amaratzis, and wasn't embarrassed to learn at the age of 40, who learned Torah with such Mesiras Nefesh, leaving his wife for 24 years. This is the man who defied the Romans, who didn't look at his personal safety and continued to teach Torah. This is the man who said, "Without Torah we are like fish out of the sea. There is no chance whatsoever." Zu Torah v'zu Chara, he is being led to his execution for his skin to be raked off with iron rakes. Rabbi Shalom, how could you? We're willing to accept everything, but how could we accept this? How could this be justified? And the HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, "Quiet. You want to force me to undo the whole world so that you can see it? So you can understand the plan of the Bria? So you can understand what Olam Haba is? You can understand why a person lives down here in this world? The only way for me to explain it to you is to undo the whole world. Then you'll see it's not a contradiction. Then you'll see my plan of Bria Olam, and you'll understand that nothing happens if it's not a Shgacha Pratis. But you have to undo the world to do that. It's much better to have a Emunah than to have to undo the world. The king will be far better off believing the tailor than having his robe completely undone. We know that the Ramban tells us that the life story of every Yid, the whole Bria, is in Shiras Haazinu. Parshas Haazinu is Koilo, all of the Dairis, from Bria Olam, Yitzias Mitzrayim, Kabbalah Torah, the Beis Hamikdash, Golus, until the Geula Achrayna, until the days of Mashiach. When you look at all of these things 1 year at a time, it is difficult to understand. Therefore, the Torah reminds us at the beginning of Parshas Haazinu that Tamim Pa'aloi, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the whole picture, which is perfect. And the truth is, if a Yid is Zaycha on any given day, he can be Zaycha to that Emunah of Tamim Pa'aloi, of understanding that whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is perfect. The Aseret Yemei Tshuva explains that Sasem correspond to the Aseret Memoris Niver Ha'olam. The Aseret Yemei Tshuva lifts a Yid to the Madrega of Emunah, that is, if he engages the Aseret Yemei Tshuva properly, where he zeroes in on Bria Olam, and he says it's all one Bari Olam, and there is all one master plan. Even though when you look at it from a limited perspective, you see different things and sometimes even contradictory things. To the Karach HaTorah, a Yid is Zaycha to feel the whole picture even though he doesn't see the whole picture. And that is why the Aseres HaDibros, the Aseres Memoris and the Aseres Yemei Tshuva all correspond to each other. And that's why the Shir of Haazinu, says the Sfas was said with Dafka through Moshe and Yeshua, sort of a chibur of Torah Shebeksav and Torah Shebal-Peh, to let us know it is all connected, and we are all connected to what is really a complete picture.
This shir is distributed by Koladaf, 11 Stei Chemet Street, Yerushalayim. For donations, please call 02-5383-999. Fax 02-538-0267. Postbox 57035.